One of my favorite stories of resisting the world as it is comes out of 2007 in Knoxville, Tennessee. In 2007 in Knoxville, a group of white supremacists were planning to gather in hate to present their vitriolic version of the world, gathering with the KKK and other white supremacist groups on the streets of Knoxville, and they were met with a very unanticipated foe that day: clowns. Literal clowns dressed in makeup and costumes, gathering, far outnumbering the KKK and the white supremacist groups, calling themselves the Ku Klux Klans. And on that day in Knoxville, Tennessee, as people would gather on one side with a version of their hateful world saying white power, on the other side of the street, the clowns, pretending that they did not know what was being said, would call out white flour and throw bags of white flour up into the air all over themselves and anyone else nearby. The angry white supremacists would say back one more time, "No, white power, white flour, you say?" And more white flour would be thrown all over, creating a cloud of dust and laughter. The other side of the street got angrier and angrier, yelling white power, and then the clowns would yell white flowers and produce bouquets of white flowers. Then they would scream out tight shower, and all gather around with a hose over them spraying water, yelling wife power and anything else they could to frustrate the other side. One of the things I love about this is that the people who were dressed in costumes and makeup said to the people on the other side of the street gathering in hate, "We don't even accept your premise that you are to be taken seriously. If you are going to show up here and be that ridiculous, then so will we. We are not afraid of you because you are ridiculous, and so when you scream out chants of hate, we will be clowns in response." Those folks gathering in resistance did so with joy. They didn't meet violence with violence or hate with hate. As serious as these threats are to people's lives and bodies, they stood and put themselves on the line, proposing an entirely different world was possible, where the KKK is met with clowns and ridiculousness. In these last few weeks, as our world has changed so much, I've seen so many people propose alternative worlds over and over again. In the midst of real suffering, real fear, economic loss, and loss of life, I have watched, like I imagine so many of you have, as people around the world have stood up and proposed a different way of living, even in the midst of anxiety or fear. Like so many of you, I'm guessing I was, and I'm guessing you were moved by videos from Italy, where in the midst of some of the worst losses of life, crowded hospital systems, an economy crumbling around them, people gathered daily on their balconies of their apartments and homes to sing opera together in the streets. In Florence and Sicily and cities all over. In the midst of great real suffering, people stand on their balconies and make beautiful art and music together. And that world has always been possible. I've had my heart lifted by watching scenes and videos where children are having birthday parties, and they can't because we're social distancing, but instead people are taking parades of cars by their houses and cheering for them and singing songs to try and brighten the life of a child who just wanted a birthday party, a parade happening in the midst of isolation. Or people in hospitals waiting 6 to 10 feet apart, singing to the people that come in who are nurses and doctors, or the people who sanitize and clean the buildings in celebration of them, singing out in song. We have always been able to sing on our balconies. We have always been able to meet hate with something different and more powerful. We have always been able to throw parades for a child. Why have we waited until now? One of the questions that's been running through my mind as so many of us talk about getting back to normal when all of this is over is, what normal do we want to get back to? The world where we're not singing on balconies to each other? The world where we're polarized and afraid of our own neighbors. The world in which we are not gladly celebrating and clapping for the people who make our lives possible through often unseen work. I don't want to go back to normal. There is always an alternative world waiting to be born underneath this one, but the only way we help it be born is if we reject the premise that what is normal is what should be. Whether that's in our relationships, our families, our jobs, our churches, our governments, our neighborhoods, doing things the way they have been done is not always the way to be. We can help an alternative world be born if we question the premise that normal is normal. In the poem from Naomi Shihab Nye, the Reverend Cantor read this morning, she questions, as a culture did, what it means to truly welcome somebody else. In the poem it says, perhaps don't ever ask someone who they are or where they came from when they come to your door until they've stayed with you 3 days and you're good friends. Don't ask them who they are until you've fed them, until your children have served them food and water and tea. She says in the poem, I refuse to be claimed. And I love that line. I refuse to be claimed. Think of all the ways that we are claimed by what seems to be normal. The patterns of relationship that we put up with that we don't have to. Looking around and seeing a way that a government treats its people in unkind or cruel or unforgiving ways. The way that we polarize each other. Think of the ways that we are claimed by political party or our bank account, our address, our gender. Think of the ways that we are claimed by the way our culture, society tells us love is supposed to look. I refuse to be claimed, she says. She's proposing an alternative world. And that in the church calendar is what Palm Sunday is all about. In the church word, Palm Sunday comes a week before Easter, and it celebrates Jesus, the teacher, coming in to the city of Jerusalem, and at least for those of us who know the end of the story, a triumphant parade of welcome and celebration for him is in dark contrast to what's coming. But in the Palm Sunday story, the teacher Jesus comes into the city of Jerusalem hailed as a king in the most powerful military and economic empire in the world. So in the story, here we have some of the most marginalized, poorest, sickest people in the history of the planet who are under the foot of the most powerful economic and military empire there ever was. A government that did not care how its people did unless things got back to normal and Rome could be Rome. And the person that they celebrate as their king, their emperor, is a poor, likely illiterate, homeless rabbi on the back of a donkey coming into town. They throw him a parade. And when he comes into town, the most unlikely king anyone could possibly imagine, they lay their coats and tree branches and palms on the ground as a display of affection, a public spectacle that at the time was just as wild as clowns meeting white supremacists or people singing on their balconies in the midst of illness or fear. They said, you want to see a king? We'll show you what a king looks like. This is our king. This is our kingdom. An act of resistance, so strong, made of such weak and fragile things. What I love about that story is nowhere are the followers of Jesus saying, what we want is to be rich and powerful just like all the Roman citizens. What we want is to be able to oppress and control others. We want to be part of the normal and the status quo. They say we are going to create a different world entirely, in which a God favors the poor and the sick and the lonely. What you think power and control and money and love look like is not what we're going to do. That story points to a God that does not accept the premise of the status quo. A God that would turn a poor, homeless teacher into a king. Or the same God that makes dead stars turn into symphony orchestras, the same God that turns dust into people and people into dust, the same force of life that moves in all of us that turns our tragedies into our opportunity to connect with others in compassion and hope and resilience, a God that does not accept that things have to be this way. Whatever you call that God, the reality that forms all our lives has turned one thing into another for billions of years and will not stop in this moment. There is very real suffering in the world right now, no doubt. There is anxiety, there is pain, there is loss of livelihood and life. That is for sure. And that has always been the case. But there's something true happening in the world right now that has also always been the case. There is an alternative world waiting to be born if we reject the premise that life has to be this way. If we reject the premise that we need to go back to normal when this is over. Think of the global and personal opportunity we have. Like in the poem when Naomi Shihab Nye says, "I'm not busy. Busy is a word I've been using to pretend like I had value for a long, long time." Think of how the last few weeks in our world have disrupted everyone's notion about what's been valuable at work, or family, or church, or school, or government, all that we have done to make ourselves look busy that didn't do a thing. Or at least not a thing that matters. Think of the opportunity that we have right now as a people and families to rethink what it looks like for governments to truly care for and support their people. We can rethink education. We can rethink healthcare. We can rethink how to take care of the poorest among us. You can rethink in this moment what it means to love, what is truly, truly worthy of the attention and love of your life, and do not go back to normal when this is done. Especially if normal was not a world worth living in. Think of how often we have portrayed ourselves as busy, done things in our jobs or our churches or our cities or our neighborhoods or our families that made us feel like we were valuable but did not contribute with love and justice to those around us. We don't have to go back to the way things were at church. We don't have to go back to the way things were in our families. We don't have to go back to the way things were in our jobs or our neighborhoods or our countries or this planet. We don't have to go back to normal when this is over. There is an alternative world waiting to be born. And one of the ways to help build that is to be on the lookout for God's creativity wherever you see it. When you see a group of clowns on the roadside, making white supremacists look ridiculous because they are. That's God's creativity active in the world saying this is possible too. When you see people singing on balconies, singing opera to each other while others are sick and mourning, it's a way of saying this is possible too. This is God's alternative world. When you see parades happening for isolated children or people meeting online in ways that we haven't before, if they can do it, so can we. We have always been able to meet hate with something different. We have always been able to sing to each other on our balconies and in our homes. We have always been able to throw parades for children. We have always been able to celebrate those who make life possible for so many of us. Why have we waited until now? Be on the lookout for God's creativity wherever you see it. And when we go back to life after this moment, and we will, you don't have to accept going back to normal. You can question the premise in every environment you're at. When you go back to church, when you go back to your house, when you go back to your family or your work, when we move in the streets again and go to movie theaters and restaurants in our neighborhoods, you can say, I don't want to go back to normal. I want to build a new normal that is more loving and impactful than ever. There is real suffering and anxiety in the world right now. That is true. And there is an opportunity for us to return to life not as it was, but as it could be. an alternative world waiting to be born in this moment and all moments. May it be so. Amen.